Welcome back to Plato's Republic. We're in the middle of Book 3. So in the first half of Book 3, Socrates kept laying down rules for the guardians of his ideal city. So Book 2, he started building up the ideal city in his mind. Started out with kind of 5 guys who were just good friends, sort of like they're doing a startup. And they kept adding people as they needed them to fulfill different roles in this miniature society. And eventually, Socrates gets Glaucon to agree that you need to keep adding people, and the people are going to want luxuries, and to support their luxurious lifestyle, they're going to need to attack other cities. And to attack other cities, you need guardians, or these sort of warriors, almost kind of king people. It's not really clear what their rule-making abilities are, but they are very important, and Socrates kind of wants to lay down the rules to govern the guardians. And in Book 3, he starts out by saying that these guardians need not fear death, because we want them to be courageous in battle. We basically need to lie to them, or at least change the poems that we tell them so that they aren't afraid of dying in battle. And so he starts laying down all these examples of like, yeah, this part about Hades being terrible, like, we need to get rid of that from the Odyssey. This other bit from Hesiod, that's got to go. I was thinking a little bit more about this. We remember we heard about the afterlife first in this book from Cephalus, who's gotten to be one of my favorite characters, even though we've not seen him past the first, 10 pages of the Republic. But he talked a lot about how the best part of having money was not lying awake at night wondering who he had screwed over, because he felt like if he were afraid that he had screwed people over, he would be afraid of being tortured in the afterlife. So we do have the afterlife set up as a kind of incentive mechanism in the society as it is. So we want people like Cephalus, or kind of just regular people going about their lives, to fear death, or maybe to fear what will happen to them after they die, so that they live an honest life. So Socrates has argued that it's important for people within the society not to lie to one another, because that's kind of inefficient. But you do need lies at the societal level to keep the whole engine moving. So in particular, we need to lie to the guardians. And he pointed out in Book 2, it's just as you lie to children, just like you lie to children. Maybe you need to lie to adults so that they do the right thing, or that they do what is best for the city. So he started talking about how we basically need to change the lies that we tell the guardians so that they'll be courageous, and then, as an extension of that almost, we need to change the sorts of music and poetry that people are allowed to hear, even to the point of, I guess, the craftsmen are only allowed to make images of good things, because we want the children, especially the guardian children, only to imitate good things. And because he has this theory that beautiful things are reflected in a beautiful character, and kind of vice versa. So we want to get rid of ugly things so that people don't have bad character. I talked about how this, in reality, I don't think this idea makes any sense, but it was very popular in medieval times, and up through I think even the 19th century. Okay, so that's kind of where we are, just figuring out what's allowed and not allowed in the city. Socrates is very puritanical. Like, he's sort of the censorship board, he's the MPAA, he's the RIAA. He's just wants to have the final cut on anything that's produced in the society, whether it's music or these crafts. So, like a little bit of a fascist. Are we to take him seriously? I still don't know. I think it's important that Glaucon, his interlocutor, is a child, or at least is the later generation from Socrates, because these guys started agreeing with Socrates and not pushing back almost at the same time that Socrates said it was important that we have lies, and that just like we lie to children for their own good, or for the good of the state. So now we're just kind of treating everyone as children and lying to them in order to produce this good state. Now, the core contradiction I see in all of this is that the whole reason we had the Guardians was so we can attack other cities. The whole reason we attack other cities is to support our lifestyle of luxury, and now Socrates is stripping away those luxuries, saying we can't have all kinds of music, for instance. The phrase that stuck with me from Book 2 was, in this luxurious city, you have pastries and prostitutes. I don't think those are going to be allowed in this, like, modern, I don't know, Geneva or City on a Hill, Massachusetts Bay Colony, run by Socrates. So we'll see where he goes with this. But if we kind of get rid of the luxuries, then why do we need the Guardians unless it's just sort of this self-perpetuating, I don't know, military-industrial complex? Like, we've always been at war with Eurasia. There's never been war with Oceania. We always just kind of need to invent bad guys so that we can keep the people who are in power, even though rationally it doesn't make sense any longer. The original justification went away, which is often the case with a lot of military mechanisms. Like, oh, we're fighting the Cold War, and there's no more Soviet Union. Better go find some bad guys. So we'll see where it goes. This has been got a little bit exhausting as a chapter, going through every possible like meter and the Ionian and Mixolydian scales. So he is exhaustive, but at the same time, Socrates isn't professing. He's not like Aristotle, who just claims to know everything about everything. He's just like, yeah, I don't know a whole lot about this. Like, which are those scales again? Like, which are those meters? I'm not the poet around here. The other thing, I kind of wonder if you remember he rendered part of Homer in prose to show how much better it was. He's like, look, we can't have these certain poetical meters, not allowed in our ideal society. Let me rewrite that for you. I don't know if that's a big joke or not. It seems kind of satirical. I don't know. I don't read ancient Greek. I haven't read the Odyssey in Greek, but I'm guessing that the effect would be so bad that would read like a joke. I'm not sure though. But if you changed a famous poem in your native language and just rewrote it as prose, I don't know. I think that would be funny. A very famous example of that would be George Orwell wrote an essay, Politics in the English Language, where he demonstrates what he calls bad writing. So he rewrites part of the Bible. I think it's the book of Ecclesiastes. Like, the battle does not belong to the strong, nor the race to the swift, but time and chance happen to them all. And he kind of rewrites that in this bureaucratic, very, very dull language. And I think maybe that's what Socrates is doing there when he's rewriting Homer, but I'm not sure. But I'll leave it alone for now. And we're going to finish up Book 3, and we'll just dive right into it. We just finished talking about the musical training, which kind of includes this moral training under this idea that good rhythms in your soul produce moral works out in the world. Yeah, we'll get to the physical aspect. I guess the last thing is that he was saying, the other contradiction I identified was, he was saying that people with good souls also have good speech, or beautiful speech. And in the first book, he said we couldn't really figure out who was good and who was bad just on appearances alone. So I don't know how you reconcile those two ideas unless all of this is part of these lies that he needs to tell the children in order for people to believe that the ideal state is possible. So I still think it's a very valid and in-the-running interpretation of this whole book, is that it's all, we are the children reading this, and we're being lied to just for the good of the state, or the good of somebody. Okay, so Socrates says, now after musical training, our young people must be given physical training. Glaucon, of course. Socrates, and in this too, they must have a careful training, which starts in childhood and continues throughout life. It would, I believe, be something like this, but you should consider what you think too. You see, I, for my part, do not believe that a healthy body, by means of its own virtue, makes the soul good. On the contrary, I believe that the opposite is true. A good soul, by means of its own virtue, makes the body as good as possible. What do you think? Well, what I think is it's the same thing with the good speech and harmony. If a good soul made a good body, then we could easily identify good people by who had the most statuesque figure. I think so too, says Glaucon. No pushback at all. Socrates. Then, if we give adequate care to the mind, entrust it with the detailed supervision of the body, and content ourselves with indicating the general patterns to be followed, rather than going on at great length, wouldn't we be proceeding in the right way? I do like that. It's like, we don't have to go on at great length here, do we? Which he has done before, a bit. Glaucon. Yes, indeed. Socrates. Now, we said that our prospective guardians must avoid drunkenness. When did we say that? Did we say that? Note 54. 398E6. Oh, of course. How could it be any other way? I don't remember that. I guess we did say that. For surely, a guardian is the last person who should get so drunk that he does not know where on earth he is. Glaucon. Yes, it would be ridiculous for a guardian to need a guardian himself. Well, who watches the watchman? That's what I want to know. Socrates. What about food? These men are athletes in the greatest contest, aren't they? Yes. Then would the regimen of the ordinary trained athletes be suitable for them? Maybe. No. They need the best regimen possible. But it seems to be a soporific sort of regimen and unreliable as regards health. Or haven't you noticed that these athletes sleep their lives away, and that if they deviate even a little from their orderly regimen, they become seriously and violently ill? I have not noticed this about athletes. Maybe some of you have. Glaucon has. I have noticed that. Then, we need a more refined sort of training for our warrior athletes, since they must be like sleepless hounds, as it were, who have the keenest possible sight and hearing, and whose health is not so precarious that it cannot sustain the frequent changes of water and diet generally, and the heat waves and winter storms typical of war. So here the Guardians are compared to dogs again. You remember we saw that before when he was talking about the character of the Guardians, and he said, well, they need to be spirited, but they also need to be kind of soft-hearted. And he says, you'll never find that in the same person. He says, but you will find it in a dog. And he says that's why philosophy or love of learning is important, because dogs distinguish their friends and enemies that way. So, yeah, he's not treating them like full humans. And also kind of, I think it re-emphasizes that Socrates is kind of their master, or the Guardian's master, by way of the poets. Glaucon, I agree. Socrates. Wouldn't the best physical training, then, be akin to the simple musical training that we described a moment ago? How do you mean? I mean a simple and good physical training, and one that is especially adapted to the conditions of war. In what way? You could learn that even from Homer. For you know that when his heroes are at war, he does not portray them banqueting on fish, even though they are by the sea and in the Hellespont, or boiled meat, but roasted meat only, which is the sort of meat most easily available to soldiers. So I guess, you don't need to boil water. For it is pretty much always easier to use an open fire than to carry pots and pans around everywhere. That I can agree with, Socrates. Quite right. Nor, I believe, does Homer mention rich sauces anywhere. In fact, isn't everyone else who is in training also aware that if he is planning to stay in good physical condition, he must avoid such things altogether? No rich sauces, people. Socrates is giving you, the paleo diet right here. Listen to the man. You don't need to buy those books. Glaucon. Yes, and they are certainly right to be aware of it and to avoid them. Socrates. If you think they are right to do that, my dear Glaucon, you apparently do not approve of Syracusan cuisine or complex Sicilian relishes. Not a soldier's diet. I suppose not. Then you also object to men having a Corinthian girlfriend if they are planning to be in good physical condition. None of that. Stay away from those Corinthian women. 50. Are they good cooks or something? What is this? 56. Corinthian prostitutes enjoyed an international reputation in the classical period. Did not know that. Okay. Maybe they're also very good cooks. Falcon, absolutely. And also to their enjoying the reputed delights of Attic pastries. there's that pair again. Oh, man. Maybe they go well together. I don't know. Attic pastries, Corinthian girlfriends. Glaucon, I would have to. And the reason for that, I take it, is that we would be right to compare this sort of diet and this lifestyle to the polyharmonic songs and lyric odes that make use of every sort of rhythm. And we've outlawed most of the rhythms. Glaucon, of course. Okay, so he's really getting rid of all the luxuries for the Guardians. And I don't know how these Guardians aren't going to be mad. Like, I'd be pretty mad at everybody else if I'm like, look, I'm the one going to the war. I have to die. I don't get to have these rich sauces that all you guys have. Why? What's in it for me? What's in it for the dude? Glaucon, of course. Socrates. Their complexity engendered intemperance, didn't it? And here it engenders illness, whereas simplicity in musical training engenders temperance in the soul, and in physical training, health in the body. Keep it simple, folks. Glaucon. That's absolutely true. Socrates. And as intemperance and disease breed in a city, aren't many law courts and surgeries opened? And don't the legal and medical professions give themselves airs when even free men in large numbers take them very seriously? Okay. So they give themselves airs. Okay, so I guess he's saying if you have these complex sauces and Attic pastries, then it leads to intemperance, and that leads to disease, or at least I guess that a not simple physical regimen leads to disease. And then you need law courts and you need doctors, and these guys give themselves air, even when free men in large numbers take them very seriously. Give themselves airs. I guess that means they put on airs, or they make themselves out to be more important than they really are. Yeah, all those doctors and lawyers sucking us dry. How could it be otherwise? Could you find better evidence that a city's education is in a bad and shameful state than when eminent doctors and lawyers are needed not only by inferior people and handicraftsmen, but by those who claim to have been brought up in the manner of free men? Yeah, free men shouldn't need doctors and lawyers. I don't need no doctor. Oh man, sounds like my dad. Indeed, don't you think it is shameful and strong evidence of lack of education to be forced to make use of a justice imposed by others, as if they were one's masters and judges, because one lacks such qualities oneself? Yeah, thank you, Socrates. I don't need those guys. Glaucon, that is the most shameful thing of all, to need a doctor, or have a doctor tell you what to do, a lawyer. Do you really think so? Isn't it even more shameful not just to spend a good part of one's life in court defending oneself and prosecuting someone else, but to be so vulgar that one is persuaded to take pride in this and regard oneself as amazingly clever at doing injustice, and is so accomplished at every trick and turn that one can wiggle through any loophole and avoid punishment, and that to do all that for the sake of little worthless things, and because one is ignorant of how much better and finer it is to arrange one's own life so that one won't need to find a judge who is asleep? Okay. So, yeah, he's saying it's really vulgar to really pride yourself on, I don't know, being a very clever barrister. Alright, I'll look up the note on judge. See, glossary of terms. Not going to do that. Yeah. We don't need lawyers. Yes, that is even more shameful. What about needing the craft of medicine? So, this is Socrates just like ripping on everyone who's not a philosopher. So this again seems like making philosophy the most important thing in the society. Okay, what about needing the craft of medicine for something besides wounds or some seasonal illnesses? What about needing it because idleness in the regimen we described has filled one full of gases and phlegm, like a stagnant swamp, so that sophisticated Asclepiad doctors are forced to come up with names like flatulence and catarrh to describe one's diseases? Don't you think that is shameful? Yes, it is, and those truly are strange new names for diseases. That's strange flatulence. And of a sort that I do not imagine even existed in the time of Asclepius himself. My evidence for this is that his sons at Troy did not criticize the woman who treated the wounded Eurypylus with Primnean wine that had lots of barley meal and grated cheese sprinkled on it, even though such treatment is now thought to cause inflammation. Moreover, they did not criticize Patroclus, who prescribed the treatment. Yes, surely it was a strange drink for someone in that condition. Now, not if you recall that the sort of modern medicine that coddles the disease was not used by the Asclepiads before the time of Herodicus. Herodicus was a physical trainer who became ill and, through a combination of physical training and medicine, tormented first and foremost himself, then lots of other people as well. Okay, a physical trainer tormented himself after he became ill, and then other people. Okay, let's see what he's talking about here. How did he do that? By making his death a lengthy process. You see, although he was always tending his illness, he was not able to cure it, since it was terminal. And so he spent his life under medical treatment with no free time for anything else whatsoever. He suffered torments if he departed even a little from his accustomed regimen. But, thanks to his wisdom, he struggled against death and reached old age. He didn't need a stinking doctor. I love those stories. Like, yeah, here's this one guy. He refused Western medicine and he lived to be 112. A fine reward for his craft, that was. Inappropriate for someone who did not know that it was not because of ignorance or inexperience of this kind of medicine that Asclepius failed to teach it to his sons, but because he knew everyone in a well-regulated city had his own work to do, and that no one has time to be ill and under treatment all his life. We see how ridiculous this would be in the case of craftsmen, but we do not see it in the case of those who are supposedly happy, the rich. Hang on a second, I gotta fix this. Okay, so he really doesn't like doctors, I think, is the takeaway here. I'm not sure what he's talking about, the rich folk. What do you mean? When a carpenter is ill, he expects to get a drug from his doctor that will make him throw up what is making him sick or evacuate it through his bowels, or to get rid of his disease through surgery or cautery. If anyone prescribes a lengthy regimen for him and tells him that he should rest with his head bandaged and so on, he quickly replies that he has no time to be ill, and that it is not profitable for him to live like that, always minding his illness and neglecting the work at hand. After that, he says goodbye to his doctor, resumes his usual regimen, living doing his own job, and recovers his health. Alternatively, if his body cannot withstand the illness, he dies and escapes his troubles. Yeah, these are not usual union rules here. You gotta get back to work ASAP. Like, sorry, I don't have time to be sick. I really wonder how much those doctors knew back in ancient Greece. You know, they didn't have penicillin. They didn't have anything. Glaucon. That does seem to be the correct way for someone like that to use the craft of medicine. Okay, so now, is he going to say the rich people are the one who malinger? Socrates. Isn't that because he had a job to do, and that if he could not do it, it would not profit him to go on living? That's what they say. Keeping the job till you die is what keeps you alive. Clearly. But a rich person, it is said, has no job assigned to him of the sort that would make his life not worth living if he had to keep away from it. So it is said, at least. What? Have you not heard the saying of Socrates, that once one has had the means of life, one must practice virtue? And even earlier, in my view. Alright, I will look up this note. Good old Socrates. Who hasn't heard of him? Socrates of Miletus, as you all know, was a mid-6th century elegiac and hexameter poet, best known for his epigrams. Okay. Let's not quarrel with him about that. But let's try to find out for ourselves whether this virtue is something a rich person must practice, and if his life is not worth living if he does not practice it, or whether nursing an illness, while an obstacle to putting your mind to carpentry and other crafts, is no obstacle whatever to taking Socrates' advice. Okay, so a rich person is just someone who doesn't work in this case. And does he need to practice virtue? Or if he's nursing an illness, nursing an illness is no obstacle. Okay, I see. I got it. He's basically saying a rich person's job is being virtuous. It's like philanthropy. And he's saying that if you have an illness, does that get in the way of being virtuous? And so you're just like, no, I don't have time to be sick. I have to go back to being virtuous. So I think that's what he's getting at. Glaucon. But by Zeus it is. Excessive care of the body that goes beyond simple physical training is more of an obstacle than pretty much anything, for it's a nuisance in household management, in military service, and even in sedentary political office. Socrates. And the greatest of all, surely, is that it makes any sort of learning, thought, or private meditation difficult, by forever causing imaginary headaches or dizziness, and accusing philosophy of causing them. Yeah, it's like, oh man, I just got this terrible headache from too much philosophizing. Not this Japanese encephalitis that I have. Hence, wherever this sort of virtue is practiced and submitted to philosophical scrutiny, excessive care of the body hinders it. For it is constantly making you imagine that you are ill, and never lets you stop agonizing about your body. Is that what philosophy does? Like, Socrates is just a hypochondriac, and he's blaming the philosophy. Glaucon, yes, probably so. Then, we won't say that Asclepius knew this too, and that he invented the craft of medicine for people whose bodies are healthy in nature and habit, but have some specific disease in them. That is the type of person and condition for which he invented it. He rid them of their disease by means of drugs or surgery, and then prescribed their normal regimen so that affairs of politics would not be harmed. However, he did not attempt to prescribe regimens for those whose bodies were riddled with disease, so that by drawing off a little here and pouring in a little there, he could make their life a prolonged misery and enable them to produce offspring, in all probability, like themselves. He did not think that he should treat someone who could not live a normal life, since such a person would profit neither himself nor his city. It's kind of ascribing a lot of motives to Asclepius here. But what he was saying is, like, Asclepius was triaging. You know, he's like, okay, if you're already healthy, you don't need me. If you're a little bit sick but could get better, I'm your man. If you just have all this stuff wrong with you, like, fixing you is really not going to be good for the city or for you or your offspring, so sorry, bud. Glaucon. Here it is. Asclepius was a true man of politics, in your view. Okay. So this is, again, we got kind of equating the body with the body politic, and he's saying Asclepius acted in a way that was best for the city. And that's sort of how we had, like, all these lies justified, because it's for the good of the city. Okay, I don't know why Asclepius is so important. I guess, maybe he was the most famous doctor in ancient times. Couldn't tell you. I ain't never heard of him. Heard of Hippocrates. Clearly so. And it was because he was like that, don't you see, that his sons, too, turned out to be good men in the war at Troy, and practiced the craft of medicine as I say they did. Don't you remember that they sucked out the blood and applied gentle drugs to the wound Pandarus inflicted on Menelaus? But they no more prescribed what he should eat or drink after that than they did for Eurypylus. That was because they assumed that their drugs were sufficient to cure men who were healthy and living an orderly life before being wounded, even if they happened to drink wine mixed with barley and cheese right afterward. Yeah, the worst. But they thought that the lives of naturally sick and intemperate people were profitable neither to themselves nor to anyone else, that the craft of medicine shouldn't be practiced on them, and that they should not be given treatment, not even if they were richer than Midas. Okay. Kind of the virtuous doctors. The sons of Asclepius were indeed very sophisticated in your view. It is the right view to hold of them. And yet it is on just this point that Pindar and the tragedians are not persuaded by us. They say that Asclepius, even though he was the son of Apollo, was bribed with gold to heal a rich man who was already dying, and that is why he was struck by lightning. Okay, Asclepius was... Okay, I guess he's... maybe he's a daemon. But, in view of what we said before, we won't accept both claims from them. On the contrary, we will say that if Asclepius was the son of a god, he was not a money grubber, and that if he was a money grubber, he was not the son of a god. Okay, sure. Why not? We're just making up all the qualities that we want about the gods. That's absolutely right. But what do you say about the following, Socrates? Won't we need to have good doctors in our city? And the best, I take it, will be those who have treated the greatest number of healthy and diseased people. Yeah, you gotta practice your craft, just like he was saying in Book 1. In the same way, the best judges will be those who have associated with people with multifarious natures. But we don't like those multifarious natures. That's why we banned good actors in Book 2. Or maybe it was Book 3, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Socrates, I certainly agree that we need good ones. But do you know which ones I regard as such? I will if you tell me. Well, I will try. However, you ask about things that are not alike in the same question. What do you mean? Doctors, it is true, would become cleverest if, in addition to learning the craft of medicine, they associated with the greatest possible number of the most diseased bodies right from childhood, had themselves experienced every illness, and were not, by nature, very healthy. Yeah, that's what I want, a really sick doctor. After all, they do not treat a body with a body. If they did, we would not allow their bodies to be or become bad. But it is with a soul that a body is treated, and it is not possible for a soul to treat anything well if it is or has become bad itself. Okay, so our doctors need good souls. I guess that makes sense, because if you remember from Book 1, he's like, well, who's the best person to poison someone? A doctor! Doc, and that's right. But a judge, my friend, does rule a soul with a soul. And it is not possible for a soul to be nurtured among bad souls from childhood, to have associated with them, and to have itself indulged in every sort of injustice, so as to be able to draw exact inferences from itself about the injustices of others, as in the case of diseases of the body. On the contrary, it itself, the craft of medicine. They associated with must... What? Okay, there's some terrible editing here. On the contrary, it itself, the craft of medicine, they associated with, must have no experience of, and be uncontaminated by, bad characters while it is young, if, as a fine and good soul itself, it is going to make judgments about what is just in a healthy way. I don't know what's going on with the with must, but... That is precisely the reason, indeed, that good people are thought to be naive when they are young, and easily deceived by unjust ones. They do not have the models within themselves of the behavior of bad ones. That's pretty true. Okay. So what he's saying is, a good doctor needs to be exposed to diseases because he's not using his body to treat other people, but he learns about diseases that way. He uses his soul or his reason to treat people. But he's saying a judge, if you expose him to nefarious characters early in life, then he's not going to be a very good judge. Let's see, I think it's because it might corrupt his soul. Okay. Glaucon. Yes, indeed. That is precisely what happens to them. That is why a good judge must not be young, but old. A late learner of what sort of thing injustice is, who has become aware of it, not as something at home in his soul, but as an alien thing present in other people's souls. That's an interesting idea. I kind of like that. He must have trained himself over many years to discern how naturally bad it is by using his theoretical knowledge, not his own intimate experience of it. Okay, I mean, maybe. At any rate, it would seem that the noblest judge would be like that. Socrates. And so is the good one you have asked about, since the one who has a good soul is good. The clever and suspicious person, on the other hand, who has committed many injustices himself and thinks of himself to be unscrupulous and wise, appears clever when he associates with those like himself, because he is on guard and looks to the models within himself. But when he meets with good people who are older, he is seen to be stupid, distrustful at the wrong time, and ignorant of what a healthy character is, since he has no model of this within himself. But because he meets bad people more often than good ones, he seems more wise than foolish, both to himself and to them as well. That's absolutely true. Though we must not look for a good judge among people like that, but among the sort we described earlier. For while a bad person could never come to know either vice or virtue, a naturally virtuous person, when educated, will in time acquire knowledge of both virtue and vice. And it is someone like that, and not a bad person, who becomes a wise judge, in my view. So, I don't know. I don't know if this really fits in the ideal city, or this is just Socrates wanted to share his opinion about what makes a good judge. Alright, so you want someone who basically had a happy childhood, maybe kind of naive, and then later in life they're like, oh, this is what murder is. Glaucon. And I share your view. What a surprise. Then, once you establish by law in your city, I love how he's making it Glaucon City when Socrates has done all the work here. He's like, wow, what a great city you invented. Both the craft of medicine we mentioned and this craft of judging along with it. And these crafts will care for such of your citizens as have naturally good bodies and souls. But those whose bodies are not like that, they will allow to die. While those whose souls are naturally and incurably bad, they will themselves put to death. Whew! Okay. So I think this is where kind of the eugenics comes into the city. Is where if you got a bad soul, you're put to death. And if you don't have a good body, just like, sorry, we're cutting you off here. Again, where's the role of error in this? In Book 1, all of his refutations were, well, you might be mistaken about who's good and who's bad. In this case, maybe as far as the body's concerned, that seems to be objective, although sometimes, you think someone's really sick and then they get better eventually. With the bad souls, I don't know how you judge that, except with a good speaking, I guess, from earlier in the book. Glaucon. Yes, we have seen that as best both for those who receive such treatment and for the city. I mean, okay, unless the other possibility is that, okay, you will make mistakes in this ideal city, but that's okay. As long as people don't believe you've made a mistake, then you're doing well. So this is sort of the political equivalent of Glaucon's argument that the best, before Glaucon just started agreeing with everything Socrates said, he said the best state of all for an individual is to be unjust, but to seem to be just. And maybe that's going to be the prescription for the city, too. It's like, the best thing for a city is to seem to be just, even if you are unjust. So even if you make these errors, maybe that's okay as long as people believe you have not made an error. So that would be kind of the dark, sort of Hobbesian, fascist kind of view, which I think follows from all the logic laid out in Book 2. Because all this other stuff seems a little bit ridiculous. Like, oh yeah, just all you need is a good soul, and you'll have a good body, and you just need to have good speech, and the soul is in concordance with the speech, and the soul's in concordance with the body, etc., etc. Like, that doesn't actually make any scientific sense. Alright. And so it is clear that your young people, there's that your again, will be wary of coming to need a judge, since they employ that simple sort of musical training, which we said engenders temperance. What a noble thought. Of course. And won't a person who is musically trained hunt for a type of physical training by following those same tracks, and catch it if he chooses? And won't the result be that he will have no need of the craft of medicine, except when absolutely necessary? That's my view, at any rate. And he will undertake even the regimens and exertions of physical training, with an eye less to strength than to arousing the spirited part of his nature. That's what we need to fight. Unlike all other athletes who use diets and exertions only to gain muscle power. Okay, so he's doing workouts that just like arouse his spiritedness. Bloodlust, perhaps. That's absolutely right. Then, doesn't it follow, Glaucon, that those who established musical training and physical training did not establish them with the aim that some people attribute to them, namely, to treat the body with the former and the soul with the latter? What? The former is musical training. How do you treat the body with musical training? And the soul with the latter. I don't know if that's a mistake or what. No one said physical training was for the soul and musical training was for the body. So I don't know if that's a translational issue or if that's in the original. Kind of mixing those two up. I'm not sure. Glaucon, what was it then? Socrates, it looks as though they established both chiefly for the sake of the soul. Or at least for this spiritedness. I don't know who established these trainings in prehistory. Glaucon, how so? Socrates, have you never noticed the mindset of those who have a lifelong association with physical training but stay away from musical training? Or again, of those who do the opposite? Yeah, I know people like that. What do you mean? Savagery and toughness in the one case, softness and overcultivation in the other. I have certainly noticed that people who devote themselves exclusively to physical training turn out to be more savage than they should, while those who devote themselves to musical training turn out to be softer than is good for them. Gotta find that happy medium. And surely, the savageness derives, this is Socrates speaking, from the spirited element of their nature, which, if rightly nurtured, becomes courageous, but, if overstrained, is likely to become hard and harsh. So it seems. What about the cultivation? Wouldn't it derive from the philosophic element of their nature, which, if relaxed too much, becomes softer than it should, but, if well nurtured, is cultivated and orderly? That's right. Now, we said that our guardians must have both these natures. Okay, that's where all this started, was this dual nature, this dual dog-like nature of being spirited and soft. And here's his answer to it. You need just the right amount of physical training so that you're spirited, and just the right amount of musical training so that you're a little bit of a softie. Glaucon, yes, they must. Socrates, and mustn't the two be harmonized with one another? Glaucon, of course. And isn't the soul of the person thus harmonized temperate and courageous? Certainly. And that of the inharmonious person cowardly and savage? Exactly! All we need is good education. Just fix the schools. Everything's solved. Socrates, so, when someone gives himself over to musical training and lets the flute pour into his soul through his ears, as through a funnel, yeah, those sweet, soft, and plaintive harmonies we mentioned, and when he spends his whole life humming, entranced by song, the first result is that whatever spirit he had, he softens the way he would iron and makes useful rather than useless and brittle. But when he keeps at it unrelentingly and charms his spirit, the next result is that he melts it and dissolves it completely until he has cut out, so to speak, the very sinews of his soul and makes himself, quote, a feeble warrior. Yes, indeed. Not too much music, just the right amount. And if he has a spiritless nature to begin with, this happens quickly. But if he has a spirited one, his spirit becomes weak and unstable, quickly inflamed by trivial things and quickly extinguished. As a result, people like that become quick-tempered and prone to anger, instead of spirited and filled with peevishness. Absolutely. And on the other hand, what about someone who works hard at physical training, eats very well, and never touches musical training or philosophy? At first, because his body is in good, strong condition, isn't he full of pride and spirit and more courageous than he was before? He certainly is. But what happens if he does nothing but this and never enters into partnership with a muse? Even if there was some love of learning in his soul, because it never tastes any sort of instruction or investigation, and never participates in any discussion, or in any of the rest of musical training, doesn't it become weak, deaf, and blind because it never receives any stimulation or nourishment, and its senses are never purified? Yes, it does. Socrates, then a person like that, I take it, becomes an unmusical hater of argument, who no longer uses argument to persuade people, but force and savagery, behaves like a wild beast, and lives in awkward ignorance without rhythm or grace. That's exactly how it is. Okay, I'm going to pause just there. So, an unmusical hater of argument. So Socrates sort of uses argument to persuade people, but also sort of uses music. Or not music, but he uses emotion to persuade people. Not force, but it's not just reason, right? So you remember the first part where Polemarchus has some holes poked in his argument, but he's not persuaded, partly because I think that those initial arguments that Socrates makes don't put Polemarchus in a good light. So you remember one was, oh, you don't really know who your friends are, so that's a problem. He's like, well, I know who my friends are. He's like, oh, well, you're like a thief. A just person is like a thief. He's like, no, I'm not a thief. And he says, well, a just person shouldn't be doing things that make other people less just. Like, he shouldn't actually be harming his enemies. And then Polemarchus is like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a good argument. So I kind of think of that when I'm reading this. The other thing I'm thinking about is behaves like a wild beast. Where did we see wild beast before? Anybody remember? Where did we see who was described as a wild beast? Anyone? That's right, Thrasymachus. Thrasymachus was waiting like a caged beast to spring into action and give his speech about how he thought justice was whatever's advantageous to the stronger. And is he living, would that be someone who's in awkward ignorance without rhythm or grace? I don't know. I thought it was a fairly forceful speech. I couldn't actually judge the rhythm without knowing the original Greek. But maybe that is Thrasymachus, is someone who is an unmusical hater of argument. Because you also remember Thrasymachus wanted to leave early. He's just like, all right, I've said my piece. I don't want to sit around here and debate this all day with Socrates. So maybe that is Thrasymachus. Also because he's talking about the advantage of the stronger. Maybe he's a strong guy who's just spent all his time working out and not doing this musical training. So that's something I would write a high school paper about. Glaucon. That's exactly how it is. Socrates. So, I, for one, would claim that it is to deal with these two things, so it seems that a god has given two crafts to human beings, musical training and physical training, to deal with the philosophical and spirited elements, and not, except as a byproduct, with the soul and body. but with these two so that they might be harmonized with one another by being stretched and relaxed to the appropriate degree. Okay, musical, physical training, all you need. We don't really need doctors, don't really need lawyers. And we're not training our bodies so much as our philosophical and spirited elements. Yes, it seems so. Then it is the person who makes the best blend of musical and physical training and applies them in the most perfect proportion to his soul that we would be most correct to describe as completely trained in music and as most in harmony, far more so than the one who merely attunes his strings to one another. Okay. So, this is such a weird argument. So he's saying the person who has the perfect amount of music and perfect amount of physical training, that is the most musical, because his soul is in harmony. And not that darn musician. He's really just hating on all these professions. Like, he clearly doesn't like doctors or lawyers very much. Doesn't actually like musicians very much. Alright, what's next? Ship's captains? What kind of bad thing are you gonna say about a ship's captain? Or a shoemaker? Probably so, Socrates. Then, don't we also need this sort of person in our city, Glaucon, as a permanent overseer, if indeed its constitution is to be preserved? A permanent overseer. Okay, is this going to be the philosopher king? Not sure. Yes, we will need him most of all. And he did ridicule the idea earlier about the guardians needing a guardian, right? But now it looks like maybe they'll get him. I don't know exactly. I'm not sure if he's just saying the guardians need this or this permanent overseer is a different office. Socrates. Those, then, would be the patterns of their education and upbringing. For why should we enumerate their dances, hunts, chases with hounds, athletic contests, and horse races? After all, it's pretty much clear that they should be consistent with these patterns, so there should no longer be any difficulty in discovering them. Okay, so this is him saying at the beginning, he's like, we don't have to spell out everything. We just need to give the overall patterns, and people can figure it out from there. Glaucon. No, presumably there should not. Socrates. Alright. Now, what is the next question we have to settle? Isn't it which of these same people will rule, and which be ruled? Ooh. Glaucon. Of course. Socrates. Well, isn't it clear that the older ones must rule, whereas the younger ones must be ruled? Yes, it is clear. And that the rulers must be the best among them? Yes, that's clear too. And aren't the best farmers the ones who are best at farming? Yes. In the present case, then, since the rulers must be the best of the guardians, mustn't they be the ones who are best at guarding the city? Okay, so the rulers are drawn from the guardian class. That makes sense. Glaucon, yes. Then mustn't they be knowledgeable and capable in this matter, and in addition, mustn't they care for the city? Yes, they must. But a person would care most for what he loved. Necessarily. And he would love something most if he thought that the same things were advantageous both for it and for himself, and if he thought that when it did well, he would do well too. This is like tying CEO pay to the stock price, right? And then if it didn't, the opposite would happen. That's right. Then we must choose from among our guardians the sort of men who seem, on the basis of our observation, to be most inclined, throughout their entire lives, to do what they believe to be advantageous for the city, and most unwilling to do the opposite. Yes, they would be most suitable for the job. I think, then, that we will have to observe them at every stage of their lives to make sure that they are good guardians of this conviction, and that neither compulsion nor sorcery will cause them to discard or forget their belief that they must do what is best for the city. Okay, you're really putting a lot of faith in your own knowledge here. Before, he's like, I don't know who's just or not. We might have, remember, the, secret Hitler. What do you mean by discarding? I will tell you. It seems to me that the departure of a belief from someone's mind is either voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary when he learns that the belief is false. Involuntary in the case of all true beliefs. Alright, I'm going to read that again. The departure of a belief from someone's mind. Alright, basically how are you persuaded of something? Either you agree to it or not. Voluntary when he leaves, or he learns that the belief is false. Okay, so you learn a belief is false. You're like, get out of here, belief. You're not welcome here. Involuntary in the case of all true beliefs. Don't know what he's talking about, but neither does Glaucon. I understand the voluntary sort, Glaucon says, but I still need instruction about the involuntary. Okay, tell me, Socrates. What? Don't you know that people are involuntarily deprived of good things, but voluntarily deprived of bad ones? Isn't being deceived about the truth a bad thing, whereas possessing the truth is a good one? Not if you're a guardian, and you're being lied to about the afterlife. Or don't you think that to believe things is to possess the truth? The world is everything, which is the case. No, I think you are right, and I do think that people are involuntarily deprived of true beliefs. I don't know how that works. Involuntarily deprived of good things. Okay, so possessing the truth is a good thing, and you are involuntarily deprived of a good thing. Okay, so it's like maybe the truth is stolen from you somehow? Oh yeah, there it is. Then isn't it through theft, sorcery, and compulsion that this happens? Now I do not understand again. I suppose I'm making myself as clear as a tragic poet. He doesn't like poets. By those who have their beliefs, I think he's jealous. By those who have their beliefs stolen from them, I mean those who are over-persuaded, or those who forget. Because argument in the one case and time in the other takes away their beliefs without their noticing. You understand now, don't you? Okay, so argument is how you lose your belief voluntarily, and then time is how you lose your belief involuntarily. So you had a true belief and it just disappears over time for some reason. Well then, by those who are compelled, I mean those who are made to change their beliefs by some suffering or pain. Ooh, yeah, it's like the Inquisition. I understand that too, and you are right, says Glaucon. And the victims of sorcery, I think you would agree, are those who change their beliefs because they are charmed by pleasure or terrified by some fear. It seems to me that all deception is a form of sorcery. Interesting idea. Well then, as I was just saying, we must discover which of them are best at safeguarding within themselves the conviction that they must always do what they believe to be best for the city. We must watch them right from childhood, and set them tasks in which a person would be most likely to forget such a conviction or be deceived out of it. We must select the ones who remember and are difficult to deceive and reject the others. Do you agree? This is starting to sound kind of like Ender's Game, where they just pick the right people when they're 6 years old. Glaucon. Yes. And we must also subject them to the labors, pains, and contests, and watch for the same things there. That's right. Then we must also set up a third kind of competition for sorcery. Like those who lead cults into noise and tumult to see if they are afraid, we must subject our young people to fears, and then plunge them once again into pleasures, so as to test them much more thoroughly than people test gold in a fire. And if any of them seems to be immune to sorcery, preserves his composure throughout, is a good guardian of himself and of the musical training he has received, and proves himself to be rhythmical and harmonious in all these trials, he is the sort of person who would be most useful both to himself and to the city. And anyone who is tested as a child, youth, and adult, and always emerges as being without impurities, should be established as a ruler of the city as well as a guardian, and should be honored in life and receive the most prized tombs and memorials after his death. But those who do not should be rejected. That is the sort of way, Glaucon, that I think rulers and guardians should be selected and established, though I have provided only a pattern, not the precise details. So this is interesting, just finding your rulers almost at birth, or at least in childhood. And yeah, just kind of testing their psychological characteristics as early as possible. I've always kind of wondered if you could make an evil organization based on the same principles. Let's say you wanted to make evil guardians. You choose the worst sociopaths you can find. like in childhood, adolescence, etc. And then you're like, all right, we have like this band of sociopaths who can do anything and have absolutely no remorse. I think that'd be the most powerful organization in the world. And that's, yeah, sort of the dark, mirrored version of what Socrates is prescribing. Glaucon, I also think much the same. Shocking. Then, wouldn't it really be most correct to call these people complete guardians? The ones who guard against external enemies and internal friends, so that the former will lack the power, and the latter the desire, to do any evil. But to call the young people to whom we were referring as guardians just now auxiliaries and supporters of the guardians' convictions. Okay, so you got the regular guardians, like they've got musical and physical training, but the real guardians, the complete guardians, have these pure souls and are never given over to sorcery or anything else. Not a bad idea. Yes, I think it would. How then could we devise one of those useful lies we were talking about a while ago? Here we go. Here I think is the very important passage. Perk up. Pay attention. A single noble lie that would, preferably, persuade even the rulers themselves. But, failing that, the rest of the city. What sort of lie? Here it is. Get excited. The noble lie. The magnificent myth. Nothing new, but a sort of Phoenician story about something that happened in lots of places prior to this. At least, that is what the poets say and persuaded people to believe. It has not happened in our day, and I do not know if it could happen. It would take a lot of persuasion to get people to believe it. You seem hesitant to tell the story. Also love that as a rhetorical technique. Like, I could tell it to you, but you don't want it. You don't want to hear it. Like, tell us, Dad. You will realize I have every reason to hesitate when I do tell it. Out with it. Do not be afraid. Socrates, all right. I will. Though I do not know where I will get the audacity or the words to tell it. I will first be trying to persuade the rulers and the soldiers and the rest of the city that the upbringing and the education we gave them were like dreams. That they only imagined they were undergoing all the things that were happening to them, while in fact they themselves were at that time down inside the earth being formed and nurtured, like in the Matrix, and that their weapons and the rest of their equipment were also manufactured there. When they were entirely completed, the earth their mother sent them up, so that now, just as if the land in which they live were their mother and nurse, they must be deliberate on its behalf, defended if anyone attacks it, and regard the other citizens as their earth-born brothers. Whew! That is quite the noble lie. You were born underground. All that education, that wasn't at the local elementary school. That was deep within the earth, in a dream. It is not for nothing that you were ashamed to tell your lie earlier. No, it was only to be expected. But all the same, you should listen to the rest of the story. Although all of you in the city are brothers, we will say to them, in telling our story, when the god was forming you, he mixed gold into those of you who are capable of ruling, which is why they are the most honorable, silver into the auxiliaries, and iron and bronze into the farmers and other craftsmen. For the most part, you will produce children like yourselves, but because you are all related, a silver child will occasionally be born to a golden parent, a golden child to a silver parent, and so on. Therefore, the first and most important command from the god to the rulers is that there is nothing they must guard better or watch more carefully than the mixture of metals in the souls of their offspring. If an offspring of theirs is born with a mixture of iron or bronze, they must not pity him in any way, but assign him an honor appropriate to his nature and drive him out to join the craftsmen of the farmers. On the other hand, if an offspring of the latter is found to have a mixture of gold or silver, they will honor him and take him up to join the guardians or the auxiliaries. For there is an oracle that the city will be ruined if it ever has an iron or a bronze guardian. So, have you a device that will make them believe this story? I think we just need a good poet. Whew. That is a great, magnificent. That might be the most famous passage in the whole book. I'll talk about it in just a minute. Glaucon, no, none that would make this group believe it themselves. But I do have one for their sons, for later generations, and for all people who come after them. Yeah, it's like, we can't fool anybody who's alive, but kids don't know anything. We can tell them anything. Socrates. Well, even that would have a good effect by making them care more for the city and for each other. For I think I understand what you mean. Namely that all this will go where tradition leads. What we can do, however, when we have armed our earthborn people, is lead them forth with their rulers at their head. They must go and look for the best place in the city for a military encampment, a site from which they can most easily control anyone in the city who is unwilling to obey the laws, or repel any outside enemy who, like a wolf, attacks the fold. And when they have established their camp and sacrificed to the appropriate gods, they must make their sleeping quarters. Mustn't they? Yes. It must. Okay, so now he's talking about having, like, a little citadel in the city, I guess. And mustn't these provide adequate shelter against the storms of winter and the heat of summer? Yes, of course. After all, I assume you are talking about their living quarters. Yes, but one for soldiers, not moneymakers. What difference do you think there is between the two again? That's a good little reader insertion. I will try to tell you. You see, it is surely the most terrible and most shameful thing in the world for shepherds to rear dogs, as auxiliaries to help them with their flocks in such a way that those dogs themselves, because of intemperance, hunger, or some other bad condition, try to do evil to the sheep, acting not like sheepdogs, but like wolves. Of course, that is terrible. Okay. You're saying you can't have shepherds rear dogs as auxiliaries? That the dogs themselves try to do evil to the sheep. Okay, yeah. Dogs need to act like dogs, not like wolves. So, mustn't we use every safeguard to prevent our auxiliaries from treating the citizens like that? Because they are stronger and becoming savage masters rather than gentle allies? Yeah, we need someone to watch the watchmen. That's what I've been saying this whole time, Socrates. We can't trust these guys. So I guess we can trust the complete guardians because they've been, like, psychologically tested since birth. Yes, we must. And wouldn't they have been provided with the greatest safeguard possible if they've been really well educated? Maybe. But surely they have been. That is not something that deserves to be asserted so confidently, my dear Glaucon. But what does deserve it is what we are saying just now, that they must have the right education, whatever it is, if they are going to have what will do most to make them gentle to one another and the ones they are guarding. That's right. I think that's what the musical education was about. But anyone with any sense will tell us that, besides this education, they must be provided with living quarters and other property of the sort that will neither prevent them from being the best guardians, nor encourage them to do evil to the other citizens. And he would be right. We've already taken away their luxuries, I think. Consider, then, whether or not they should live and be housed in some such way as this, if they are going to be the sort of men we described. First, alright, here we go. More rules for guardians. None of them should possess any private property that is not wholly necessary. Second, wow, there's a little commune here taking care of us. None should have living quarters or storerooms that are not open for all to enter at will. Such provisions are as required by temperate and courageous men who are warrior athletes they should receive from the other citizens as a salary for their guardianship, the amount being fixed so that there is neither a shortfall nor a surplus at the end of the year. Yeah, you got to spend exactly what you make. They should have common messes to go to and should live together like soldiers in a camp. We will tell them that they have gold and silver of a divine sort in their souls as a permanent gift from the gods, and have no need of human gold in addition. Your treasure is in heaven, not on this earth. And we will add that it is impious for them to defile this divine possession by possessing an admixture of mortal gold, because many impious deeds have been done for the sake of the currency of the masses, whereas their sort is pure. No, they alone among the city's population are forbidden by divine law to handle or even touch gold and silver. They must not be under the same roof as these metals, wear them as jewelry, or drink from gold or silver goblets. And by behaving in that way, they would save both themselves and the city. But if they acquire private land, houses, and money themselves, they will be household managers and farmers instead of guardians, hostile masters of the other citizens instead of their allies. Those darn Washington lobbyists and contractors making all this money, they're not living as virtuous auxiliary guardian soldiers. They will spend their whole lives hating and being hated, plotting and being plotted against, much more afraid of internal than of external enemies, already in rushing, in fact, to the brink of their own destruction and that of the rest of the city as well. For all these reasons, let's declare that that is how the guardians must be provided with housing and the rest, and establish it as a law. Or don't you agree? Of course I do. End of Chapter 3. Whew! Pretty exciting. Man, we had a lot going on in that whole chapter. So what we covered here was starting with the physical training and talking about the importance of temperance, and you got to have just the right amount of physical training, just the right amount of musical training, and it's really for your soul, not for your body. And this is the kind of training that we're going to give to our guardians, and then he creates like this class of super guardians called the complete guardians, and then the regular guardians are just auxiliary guardians. And then he also spent some time kind of railing against doctors and lawyers, like, we don't really need those, and we're not going to like heal everybody, just who's somebody who's sick for a little while, because we gotta keep the body politic strong and keep everybody working. And then we get to the most fascinating part of this, which is bringing out the noble lie, the magnificent myth. And this one in particular has to do with convincing people that they have gold and silver elements in them, and maybe you're silver, you give birth to a gold, that person has to be taken away to be a guardian of the city. And this kind of keeps the whole city going. And the most fascinating part about this for me is like, there's not like secret guardians who know the truth. It's like everybody has to be deceived, and that kind of keeps this ideal city going forward, is no one really has complete access to the truth. Maybe these philosophers do. I think Philosopher King come into it later, but in the meantime, the guardians have to believe these myths. And so there are all kinds of modern interpretations of this, like you need some mythology to keep a nation together. I think it's basically true. Like, you need kind of a founding myth, like, oh yeah, we fought those British, and we had George Washington, and we did all these other good things together, and that makes us different from those other guys. And kind of without those national myths, you don't really have a reason. Like, people might just like try to cheat each other a lot more, or make little factions, or get violent. But it's kind of the big myths that people have about themselves. And I think it's important that personal identity ties into this myth. So it's not just a myth about like, oh yeah, we need everybody to believe this stuff about Troy, or we need everybody to believe stuff about, Romulus and Remus. It's like, no, this is a myth about you. There is gold in you. There is silver in you. Or you're part of this class, you're part of that class, and sometimes we got to take your baby away. And those, I think, are the most powerful myths. If it's about our own identity and what we are, like, you are an American, or you are a Zimbabwean, or you're whatever. Those are the ones that are kind of hardest to eradicate, because they're part of who you are, and kind of your reason seems to stem from that. And that was sort of the lesson I got from book 1 with these failed attempts to persuade Polemarchus. It's really when you get to someone's identity, that's when you persuade them. And that, I think, is why this myth is so powerful. And it also is, he seems to be very realistic about perpetuating it. He says that, we can't actually persuade people who are alive today of this myth. We can try, but we can really persuade the children. And if we just focus on the children, we'll just get this ideal city up and running. They don't need to know that they're being lied to, and it will march happily forward into the future. Again, I still can't get over this nature of, like, you have these guardians who live this ascetic life. Like, they're not allowed to have any gold. They like have common property with these mess halls. They're being lied to their whole lives, and it's all. What is the reason for it? It's to protect the lifestyle of luxury of the city, which doesn't seem like the most just of arrangements. It's like, oh yeah, we just like have this, like, they're basically a slave class to the rest of the city. But they don't realize it. They think that because they're being lied to and told that they have gold within them that can't mix with mortal gold, that they're the most important ones. But really, they kind of get the rawest deal of anybody. Like, everybody else gets to live a life of luxury kind of on their backs. So I think it's a really fascinating concept, and just the whole idea that really, when it comes down to it, we need lies to keep us together, because if we're all acting rationally and in our own interests, there's just going to be violence and chaos, and so we gotta keep it together with misinformation and noble myths. All right, that's all I got for you this time around. I'm looking forward to hearing more about these guardians and I guess their lifestyles now that we have a complete overview of their education. And yeah, hope this has given you some food for thought. Some of this stuff's getting a little ridiculous to me, like with their rhythms and music and all this, but I love these I love this last bit. I think that was my favorite, which I'd heard about before, but it's kind of fun seeing it in context and building up to it. To where we get this magnificent myth, and finding the gold within us. All right, that's all I got for you. Hit the subscribe button. Hope you're enjoying it. Hit the like button. Leave me a comment if you have anything to add, or if there's something you disagree with, or you just feel like it. All those are completely valid reasons in my book. See you tomorrow.